Celine reads novels as if they're self-help books, and this book helped me have an existential breakdown. Elif Batuman's debut novel, The Idiot, came out in 2017 and follows Turkish-American Celine, a bright but at times hapless Harvard freshman, as she navigates her first year of college in the year 1995. The book is a loosely fictional account of Elif Batuman's own experiences as a Harvard student in the 90s, and throughout The Idiot, Celine spends as much time close reading books for her Russian and linguistics classes as she does parsing emails from Ivan, an older Hungarian mathematics student who becomes the object of Celine's unrequited fixation for much of the book. Unrequited and also rather famously unconsummated, to the chagrin of many adult book critics who lamented and even expressed disbelief at the utter sexlessness of the novel. Maybe they just hadn't met enough Harvard freshmen. An anti-Bildungsroman of sorts, The Idiot ends almost exactly where it started, with Celine back on the Harvard campus about to start another year of school, and seemingly none the wiser, declaring, "I hadn't learned anything at all." The Idiot went on to be a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and something of an unlikely cult hit with its zeitgeisty millennial pink cover. Think Sally Rooney for the awkward late bloomers, but also apparently for the TikTok hot girls and sad girls alike. Not exactly the notoriety you'd expect for a brainy Gen X protagonist who is only just discovering the agonies and ecstasies of Ethernet-powered internet correspondence, but I do think the extent to which readers across generations have identified with Celine speaks to some of the universal truths and feelings about young adulthood that Elif Batuman is getting at in this book, even within Celine's hyper-specific 90s Ivy League setting. Now, 5 years after The Idiot was first published, Elif Batuman is back with a sequel in Either Or, which picks up pretty much where the first book left off, with Celine arriving in Harvard Square for the start of her sophomore year. And there is something incredibly comforting and familiar, almost deja vu-like, about slipping back into Celine's brain and her world and the structure of the campus novel. That being said, there are some key differences between The Idiot and Either Or. Where The Idiot was a book largely defined by the contrast between Celine's capacious intellect and her roiling interior life on the one hand, and her absolute utter passivity in the physical interpersonal world on the other hand, Either Or is a novel of even more thoughts and ideas, but it's also an exploration of a young person's attempt to put those thoughts and ideas into action for the first time. Early in the book, Batuman pokes fun at Celine's seemingly uneventful freshman year when a friend asks her if anything happened between her and Ivan over summer break. Notwithstanding my strong feeling that a lot of things had happened, I answered the question truthfully, in the sense that I knew Lakshmi intended it. Nothing had happened. In Either Or, Celine is now determined to make things happen, but that doesn't mean she's completely abandoning her beloved world of literature for the world of the living. Where The Idiot epitomized that disorienting period of fledgling adulthood where information and ideas exist merely to be encountered and absorbed, Either Or explores that next moment of self-development when Celine starts to regard books not only as depositories for the great ideas of human history, but as possible templates for how she might want to live her own life. This is most apparent when she picks up a paperback copy of Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard's Either Or, which seems to present her with a binary choice between leading an ethical or an aesthetic life. That is, an ethical life of duty and conformity, the life of a normie, basically, or an aesthetic life of experience, the life of the artist that Celine aspires to be. The choice presented in Either Or, of course, is a false one. After all, why not both? But Celine doesn't know that yet, and she and her best friend Svetlana are, in fact, quite eager to define themselves in such binary terms, and often in opposition to each other. Svetlana wants an ethical life, where Celine wants an aesthetic life. Celine values style, where Svetlana Svetlana values history and tradition, etc. And in those this or that, either or conversations between them, Batuman really beautifully captures, I think, what it's like to be 19 and still in that period of nascent adulthood where making any type of active choice towards self-definition feels liberating and empowering, regardless of how limiting and prescriptive the options might be. Either or isn't the only influential text that Celine encounters her sophomore year. In fact, she is incredibly Catholic in her intellectual curiosity and cultural consumption, and she's willing to close read just about anything in search of clues that might unlock the meaning of her life, whether it be The Usual Suspects or a Nine Inch Nails song. For Celine, any text is potentially useful or instructive, but she does read novels in particular as if they're self-help books. At one point, she even hilariously cross-checks Alexander Pushkin's Eugene Onegin against a literal self-help book, The Rules, Time-Tested Secrets for Capturing the Heart of Mr. Right. In particular, Celine seems to be on the lookout for scripts and rules that she can follow in order to live what she considers to be a real or legitimate life. And the script that Celine most wants to follow is the life of an artist. And she believes that in order to be a real writer, she needs to live a life and have the kinds of experiences worthy of the characters in her favorite novels. And up first on the to-do list is, you guessed it, having sex with men. For Celine, whose friends all seem to be pairing off left and right, sex and dating feel like requirements, but necessary, urgent, and universal ones. It was impossible to imagine an aesthetic life, or any life, without falling in love. Falling in love was the essential feature of a novel. And if falling in love was the only way to learn anything, and if falling in love was in some way about sex, could the fact that I hadn't had sex explain why I seemed myself not to have really learned anything? Was it sex, having sex, that would restore me to the sense of my life as a story? When Celine does finally have sex for the first time, you get the sense that it's not a particularly implicitly enjoyable experience for her, and it also doesn't immediately unlock the secrets of the human condition. But she keeps having it throughout the book, and she keeps searching for some kind of hidden meaning within it that she never quite arrives at. And it's interesting to note that Elif Batuman herself is now in a lesbian relationship and has spoken about how reading texts like Adrienne Rich's Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence helped to expand her own idea of what sexuality can encompass. Celine, for her part, wonders why she and Svetlana can't just date each other, but unlike Batuman, she has not yet read Rich and still clings to notions of love and sexuality that she's learned from her favorite books, which for the most part have been written by men. And so she concedes that, quote, "Love wasn't a slumber party with your best friend. Love was dangerous, violent, with an element of something repulsive. Love had death in it and madness. To try and escape those things was childish and anti-novelistic." Celine does have an instinctive kind of skepticism that does leave you feeling optimistic that she will one day be able to see beyond the scripts of her favorite books and discover other modes of being, and maybe even other better kinds of sex, but she's not quite there yet. For now, Celine remains dependent on and deferential to these novelistic scripts, even as she questions them, and her insecurities about the disjunctures between the lives of her favorite characters and the way she's living her own life provides fertile ground for Batuman to explore this metatextual question of what even is a novel. Because of course, Celine is quite literally a character in a novel. She is a stand-in for a younger Batuman, but she doesn't yet know that she will one day become a character in her own novel. Wrap your head around that 3 times fast. Celine is also a character in a kind of novel that at age 19 in the year 1996, she can't even really fathom yet. According to the professor of a creative writing class that she takes, just writing about your own life doesn't qualify as fiction at all. It turned out that writing what you were already thinking about wasn't creative or even writing, it was navel-gazing. And in another wonderfully meta moment that gestures at the writing that will eventually become the book The Idiot, Celine reflects, "The whole time everything had been happening with Yvonne, I had always been writing about it in my notebook or on the computer, and sometimes I wondered whether I would ever turn those pages into a novel. The thought made me feel ashamed. It felt shameful to be so unartistic and self-obsessed, to not want to invent richly fictional characters. It felt shameful to write a whole book about Yvonne." And although Celine herself has not yet expanded her concept of what a novel can be, Batuman, her older counterpart, seems to be testing the limits of the form in Either Or by leaning into its plotlessness and its bagginess, and the ways in which Celine's linear experience of life is often a random succession of thoughts and events that never fully cohere into a formal narrative, that are only really held together by the arbitrary structure of the academic school year, which I can imagine may be frustrating for some readers, especially if Celine's narration alone is not enough to carry you through 350 pages. I, for one, found Celine's meandering thoughts and observations to be as sharp and as dryly hilarious as they were in The Idiot. Hers is a brain that I would gladly swim in for hundreds and hundreds of aimless pages, and I do think that her particular blend of earnest curiosity, healthy skepticism, and deadpan, sometimes absurd observations make her one of those rare intellectual characters who is as endearing as she is brilliant. I don't think Either Or is a book that you can really spoil given its lack of plot, but if you are sensitive to that sort of thing, skip ahead. The novel does end somewhat abruptly toward the end of summer break, and when we leave Celine, she has just touched down in Russia for the first time, where she's going to spend a couple of weeks before returning back to Cambridge for the start of her junior year. On the flight over, she's reading The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James for the first time, and she has the startling realization that the characters whose lives she's been trying to emulate this whole year, characters like Isabel Archer and Madame Bovary, didn't actually write their own books. Well, that makes sense, she thinks. If Isabel could write a book, Henry James would be out of a job. That's why Madame Bovary had to be too dumb and banal to write Madame Bovary, so Flaubert could have a great humane moment where he said he was Madame Bovary. But I wasn't dumb or banal, and I lived in the future. Nobody was going to trick me into marrying some loser, and even if they did, I would write the goddamn book myself. Either Or ends before we're able to see the full impact of that epiphany, and I was initially frustrated and disappointed by that, especially since Elif Batuman has confirmed that she will not be writing a third and fourth book covering Celine's junior and senior years. But the more I've sat with it and kind of chewed on it, the more I've realized the true final impact of Celine's mid-flight epiphany is perhaps the literal existence of these two books. And so on a metatextual level, I do think there's some closure in that. And I do think that The Idiot and Either Or together form a coming-of-age story that is striking and unsettling and ultimately quite powerful in its incompleteness. One of the last images that the literal textual story of Either Or leaves us with is that of Celine on the plane headed for Russia, reading a new book that we already know is going to have a profound impact on her. And that picture of her sitting completely still, reading a book, having a potentially life-changing realization, all while simultaneously hurtling through space at 500 miles an hour. That image captures, I think, the brilliance of these books, and it also leaves you with the sense that Celine is going to be okay, that for her there will always be another book, and that her education will likely continue long after Harvard graduation. I do treasure the ways in which The Idiot and Either Or capture the fleeting specificity of early adulthood, how they bottle what is both precious and painful about that time. As Celine herself laments about the passage of freshman freshman year, quote, "How brief and magical it was that we all lived so close to each other and went in and out of each other's rooms." I have complicated and often fraught feelings about my own college experience, and I often look back on that time and irrationally wish that I had known more, or that I could somehow do it over again with the knowledge that I have now. And you know, despite giving me a minor existential breakdown, I do appreciate the ways in which either or allowed me to revisit my younger self with a little more compassion and a little less regret than I have in the past, and to remember that none of us really know anything at 19, and that if we're lucky, education, understanding, and the project of becoming who you are can and should be an ongoing, lifelong process. In closing, I will say that Elif Batuman has often spoken of her love for big, rangy, unwieldy novels, and she has also expressed interest in the kinds of books that have the capacity to change the shape of a reader's life. In an interview with the New York Times in response to the question, "What book should everybody read before the age of 21?" she said, "To me, does this book seem like it could change my life? Feels like a more useful question. I would invite people under 21 to think of the world as a treasure hunt for life-changing books with clues everywhere, and then to read as many of them as possible. Quantity is important because books are a product of their time and place, and the toxic ideas of the time get baked in. Once you read enough, you learn to discard the toxic parts and keep what helps you." And while I can imagine that the cerebral, stubbornly amorphous quality of either or may not be for every reader, for me, the pain and pleasure of reading either or came from the ways in which I felt myself and my ideas being shaken up and shaken loose and settling somewhere slightly different than they had been before. Elif Batuman's novels seem to be an exploration of the ways in which books can both trap and liberate us as readers. But for all of Celine's grappling with various literary scripts, I, for one, have been heartened to see both her and Elif Batuman, for that matter, keep the faith. Faith in books, faith in the fundamental meaning and clarifying power of literature, and faith in the belief that a novel may, in the end, in ways we don't expect, teach us how to live. If you've read either or The Idiot, I would love to hear your thoughts about either book down below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.